almost heaven. West Virginia, West Virginia, West Virginia, West Virginia.
Welcome to the Boreal Forest, or the Taiga. The one we're focusing on today is Cordillera in Western Canada in the Yukon Territory. A taiga is a biome, a large naturally occurring community of flora and fauna occupying a major habitat, a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. The taiga is a thick forest in the cold subarctic region. The subarctic is an area of the northern hemisphere that lies just south of the Arctic Circle. The taiga lies between the tundra to the north and the temperate forests to the south. Taigas are thick forests composed of coniferous trees such as spruce, pine, and fir. This region does include some abiotic factors. A non-living condition that influences or affects an ecosystem and the organisms in it. Some of these include the bitterly cold and long winter seasons, the heavy snowfall during the winter season, formation of permanently frozen ground because of the freezing of the ground moisture due to the very low temperature, cool summers of short durations having precipitation in liquid form, extreme annual variation of temperature ranging between 25 degrees Celsius during the summer and negative 40 degrees Celsius during the winter. But it still has some biotic factors. A living thing such as an animal or a plant that influences or affects an ecosystem. This creates competition within an environment. An example is the Arctic fox and the red fox, and how they compete to hunt down primary consumers, like the red squirrel and the lemmings. There is also limiting factors, which limit the size of a population in the ecosystem. There are two types of limiting factors: density dependent, which is based on the density of the population, and density independent, which is not based on the population size. Competition is a density-dependent factor, as species try to outcompete themselves for survival. Predation is another density-dependent factor, which takes place within a predator-prey relationship as one animal eats the other, which controls the population size. Now, some density-independent factors are mostly weather and natural disasters. Here are some examples of some organisms found in this ecosystem. For producers, we have the aspen, the willow, the shinleaf, and the berries. For primary consumers, we have the moose, the red squirrel, the voles, and the beaver. Secondary consumers include the Arctic fox and the weasel. Tertiary consumers, wolf, and the grizzly bear. Now we have constructed a food web, a system of interlocking independent food chains. Now here is an energy pyramid. At the bottom, you see the producers, which include some mosses, some berries. And right above it are primary consumers, which consume the producers. They include some red squirrels, some lemmings, and caribou. Secondary consumers, which is right above the primary, include owls, Arctic fox, and red fox. Tertiary, which is the top of the food chain in this area, includes some wolves, some coyotes, and some grizzly bears. In our ecosystem, there is some symbiotic relationships. One example of mutualism in the taiga is moss growing on a tree. This protects the tree and makes a house for the moss. The tree acts as a house for the moss, while the moss is protecting the tree's body. It's a win-win scenario. Now, an example of predation is the Canadian lynx preys upon the snowshoe hare. because it eats it. One example of parasitism is grapevines, turning onto hosts for the parasite aphid, and as a result, dies because the aphid infects them. One example of commensalism is parasitic fungi in trees. The fungi gets food from the decomposing tree, but the tree is not helped nor hurt because it's dead. Now one example of competition is the Canadian lynx and the Arctic fox competing for hares. We designed the natural disaster to see how animals will come back to the environment. We came up with a forest fire that kills most animals and most of the vegetation. The animals in the area leave in order to escape death, but many that cannot leave, such as trees, end up dying. After the forest fire, the trees and other vegetation begin to grow back, bringing back the primary consumers, and later on the secondary, and finally, the tertiary consumers. Even though this region is filled with many animals and rarely any humans, human activity still impacts its environment. Examples are oil drilling and fracking, which disrupt the environment, causing earthquakes and many other issues that the animals have to deal with. Industrialism also takes away many of the trees, which is a major energy group inside the pyramid that feeds the entire ecosystem. And finally, the greatest thing that impacts the environment is Liam Neeson himself. This guy, he will bite a wolf's neck. Thank you guys for watching. It's been Carrasco and Abdur. And yeah, goodbye.